So the only other thing I have to say is that we're going to have fun at this program. We're going to talk about Nandini's Nandini's books. Okay, sorry. And her program is called A Girl Like Me because she has grown up in New Delhi as an avid reader and loved all the books that she got her hands on, but there was no reflection of like her in those books. So she took care of that and wrote all her own books. And more importantly, Tutankhamun's bookseller is down at the bottom of the exhibit hall today, and they have her books. So if you want any time for her to sign them or do anything, and the other good thing is she's going to join us for lunch. She's going to be at lunch, so just keep looking for us if you want to talk to her and keep asking more questions. And okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Noreen. She is amazing. I'm so happy that we could organize this. Yeah. I was stuck on Route 6 and on Route 3, and I was panic texting her, and she just talked me through the whole thing and said, "Don't worry, you'll get here in time." And here I am. So thank you so much for having me. I love librarians and I love libraries, and I'm so happy we are back to in-person, visits and talks and events at the library. It's amazing. I was just at the Ashland Public Library a little while ago for Once Upon a Story Fest, and it was amazing. So thank you, Meena, for having me there as well. It was amazing. I loved it, and thanks to all of you for coming and hearing me talk. So, like Noreen was saying, I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in India, in New Delhi, though I've lived in Natick now since 1994. So that's, 28 years now. So that's longer than I lived in India. So it's been a while, but I did grow up when I was a little girl, and I was reading, and I was a crazy reader. I loved reading books. But I was in Delhi at the time, and the books that I could read were in Delhi, in my local high school library and my elementary school library, which we did have. So I'll go back to the beginning, and let's see if this works. So these are some pictures of me and my little sister and my older sister and my favorite cousin and my little sister's teddy bear. This is all in Meerut, which is a small town in Uttar Pradesh, where I know Meena's family is also from. So these are all in my grandmother's house in Meerut. And we did have a home library as well. And we all love to read. We read the same books and we talked to each other about them. And this is when I was in Delhi. These are during my high school days. I circled me in those pictures. That's me on the track team. That's what we wore when we were running track. And that is me in the 26th January parade, which is like the 4th of July parade. So, I'm the one in the front dressed as a Punjabi bride. And so I did a lot of, extracurriculars. I loved dance. I loved, track and sports. But my favorite place in the entire school was the library. So I just love to read and immerse myself in story and, walk in other people's footsteps and learn stuff about everything. But now when I look back at those days when I was just enjoying, I was a very uncritical reader. I read anything. I read absolutely anything. And I don't think a lot of children are like, oh, this is a good book. They just, in a very critical way, the way we do now. But I just read everything. But now when I think back to what I was reading, this is what I feel looking through the lens of an adult. Actually, I met Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. You all know about her, right? So I met her at the Kweli conference a couple of years ago, and I was so happy to meet her because I really loved, her take on books as windows and mirrors. And now when I think back to what I was reading and I look at it from that angle, it gives me a completely different perspective about what I had available to me. So, you all know that books can be windows or mirrors for children or for anyone. And 90% of what I was reading were probably window books. And they were books that were published in the United States or in Britain. And that is because India was an old British colony, and a lot of higher education, quality higher education, was in something called English medium school. So even though my mother tongue was Hindi, uh, everything we were taught was in English. So from kindergarten on, we learned Hindi and English together in kindergarten, and then history was in English, maths was in English, science was in English, geography was in English, and Hindi was just Hindi. And we didn't learn anything more in that. We just learned grammar and we learned reading and we had a few books, but there was not a lot being published in Hindi that appealed to children. So most of what I was reading that was fiction, that was meant for children, was from overseas. So we read a lot of Enid Blyton, and Enid Blyton is not very popular in the United States, but in Australia and in the UK, it is what kids read growing up. And we did too. It was the famous five, and the secret seven, and the faraway tree, and Noddy, and all this stuff. This was all Enid Blyton, and that's what we read, as well as, Narnia, C.S. Lewis, a whole bunch of American stuff, Nancy Drew, and all of that stuff. But about 10% of what I was reading was what we would call mirror books, even though they were not really mirror books, because they were comic books called Amar Chitra Katha, which means eternal comic books or picture books. And they had to do with mythology and heroes and, freedom fighters. But they were amazingly illustrated. They were about gods and legendary people, and it was amazing stuff. But that was very small. It was a very small piece of what I was reading, but we did have that, and thank goodness for that. So, what does not having mirror books do? This is something I've thought about a lot, especially since I've, talked to other people who are like me, maybe not from India, maybe from other parts of the world, who also have not had mirror books. It makes you feel invisible in, literature. And especially if you're a big reader, and a big part of what's going on in your head is all these characters that you love, Harry Potter, or, all these other characters that are in your imagination, and you're not there. So it makes you feel invisible. It makes you feel like you and your world are not worthy of being in books, and that you can't do really anything important, like save the world, or find the guy who did the murder or something. I loved Agatha Christie too, by the way. So, and it just makes you feel like you don't matter. So it's not a good place to be, and you don't realize this is what is happening to you, but you are internalizing this. So when I was a child and I first started writing, because I also wanted to write at that stage in my life, the characters and the scenarios I would come up with didn't reflect what was happening around me. It didn't show Delhi. It didn't show, my high school, the kids, what we were eating, what was happening in the marketplace. None of that stuff was in there. It was very similar to, because you kind of mimic when you first start writing. And, the famous five were going on holiday to the seaside and having scones and, all of that stuff. And they never seemed to have any parents around them. And, they were just running wild on their bikes. And we couldn't do that. It was very crowded and very hot, and nobody was going to the seaside. So, it does this is what not having mirror books does. But luckily for me in India, we did have one other very, very, very big mirror, and that was Bollywood. So thank God for Bollywood, because India has a huge storytelling tradition. Like, theater has been amazing in the entire culture for like thousands of years, since the Natya Shastra by Bharata Muni, who was like an ancient sage who wrote about the theater. And that is where all the classical dance traditions and all the theater traditions in India come from. Ever since he wrote all those books and all the plays were written, and the mythology and all of that stuff, they're very good at storytelling, but nobody was publishing books in Hindi or on Indian topics. But Bollywood was making movies. And so these are some of the movies that I loved when I was growing up. Bobby was came out in the 1960s, and it was the first Bollywood movie in which both the leads were teenagers. So it was like our Twilight. So even though I was not alive when it first came out, but they used to keep replaying it on Doordarshan, which was our state television. We didn't have a lot of channels when I was growing up. We only had Doordarshan till like the mid 80s. And then some of these other ones, Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, these were very big when I was in high school. And I love these movies. And these are some of the movies that are out more recently. And when I was in the Ashland Public Library and I put the screen up, and there were all these teenage kids in the audience who were volunteers for the library, and some of them were Indian American, they knew every single one of those movies. They're like, oh, that's Student of the Year, that's Alia Bhatt, that's Kapoor and Sons, that's Lagan. Like, they knew every single one of them. So kids here growing up are watching these movies, and they can at least see themselves in them, and that's amazing. So one of my inspirations always has to be Bollywood, because that was part of what was going on in my head when I was growing up. So Bollywood gave us stories, but Bollywood screenwriters nobody knew who they were. Like, who reads the credits, right? So, it goes by so fast. And when we were growing up, we didn't have VCRs. We didn't have Netflix. We didn't have any of that stuff. We went to the movie theater and we watched the movie, and the credits go by like this, and nobody is looking at the screenwriter. Everybody is thinking about the lead actor and the actresses. And to us, Shah Rukh Khan was the movie. Like, he made the story up. Of course he didn't, but we didn't know that. So we had no idea how to become like a Bollywood screenwriter or anything. But, book authors were famous, right? They were on the spine of every book. There was a picture and a biography of them. People talked about them. Have you read the new, such and such book? But none of them look like me, right? So, from Jane Austen to Agatha Christie, and that lady in the middle is Enid Blyton. Every one of her books had this beautiful signature. Like, if you have read a Enid Blyton book, it didn't say by Enid Blyton in any kind of text. It was her signature. So I have imitated that signature, as I know a lot of other people have. And these people were real people. They weren't like Bollywood screenwriters. But I never imagined I could be like them. It just didn't seem possible. So, that was the sort of the end of my writing dreams before even going in that direction. And so I studied maths and computer science, and that was the end of that. So if this was a Bollywood movie, this would be the intermission of my life, right? So blah, 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 blah. Life went on. I finished college. I got a job teaching computer science. Then I moved to Australia because my whole family moved to Australia. And then I got married, and my husband grew up in Stoughton. So I moved to the US, and then I got a job at Fidelity Investments in the systems company doing, sort of computer science stuff. And that was it. We bought a house in Natick. We got a couple of cats from the Metro West Humane Society. and that was it. And then we had kids. And so that is the plot twist, right? Because till then, I would, pick up a beach read now and then, but I didn't read the way I read as a kid. As a kid, I was just drinking stuff in, and everything was like alive, like it was happening in front of my eyes. When I was reading as an adult, it didn't feel that vivid somehow. So when I had the children and I started, looking for books for them, I just felt like nothing had changed, in all those years. But the one thing that had changed was me, right? Because nobody was going to make my kids feel invisible, or like they and their world were not worthy of being in books, or that they couldn't do anything really important, or that they didn't matter. Nobody was going to make my kids feel like that, right? So this is me, saying, how dare you? So then you need some kind of inspiration, right, to completely change course and your career and what you want to do with your life. So be the change you want to see in the world. And these are my kids when they were little. This is Anika and Ravi. And in the picture on the right, they're both holding teddy bears that I have hand-stitched saris for. And it is Nani bear and Dadi bear, which is Nani is your mother's mother, grandmother, and then Dadi in Hindi is your father's mother, grandmother. So they had Nani bear and Dadi bear, and you bet there were stories about Nani bear and Dadi bear. And then on the other side is them with color on their faces, and they're celebrating Holi, which is a huge festival in India. You know, it's the festival of spring, it's the festival of color. And you know, you may have seen images or videos of people throwing up all these giant color powders in the air and celebrating and dancing and getting drunk and having fun, and that is Holi. So you know, I try to recreate some of these things for them, not the drinking part, but everything else. And I wanted them to be able to see their family and you know, people who look like them, like their cousins and their aunts and uncles and their grandparents, in books. I wanted them to matter. So you know, I didn't have any training in writing. I didn't study literature in college or anything like that, but be the change you want to see in the world, right? So here goes. So this is kind of my journey to becoming a writer. It's not so easy. On the left in that picture is a group of my fellow writers who I love at SCBWI. If anyone knows, it's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I joined the New England chapter. I did a lot of the writing workshops there. And the first thing I did, I found out from my writing classes, was to read like a writer. You know, you can just read to inhale the story, or you can read and actually think about, okay, what is the author doing here? You know, how are they building the story up? How are they making these settings come alive? How are they animating their characters? And, you know, you think with a different lens when you're actually looking for craft and trying to understand. So I didn't have a lot of time or money to go get a, you know, a master in fine arts and in writing or anything, but I did try to read with that different lens. I tried to do online classes and workshops. I found some great critique partners, you know, who read what I was writing and I read what they were writing, and I learned so much from them. So on the other side is my friend Rajini and Padma, who are amazing writers. I'm sure you know them. And we have all our books up, and it's amazing to find friends who share the same background. And then the last thing I did to writing is just write. There's no substitute for that. You have to do the work. So then the illustration is an illustration from Kahani magazine, which was published in Newton, Massachusetts. It was an amazing South Asian literary magazine for children that ran for, I think, about 10 years till they shut down. They had no ads, and they published some of my biggest friends, you know, in the Indian American writing community or the South Asian writing community. And they were amazing. So they were the first ones who published anything I wrote, which was short stories. They were illustrated. They were amazing. And then I finished writing one novel. Then I finished writing another novel. Then I signed with an agent, which is a huge milestone. It's very hard to sign with an agent. And I started writing novel 3. But all along this journey, this is what was happening. There was a lot of rejection. This is part of the journey. Unfortunately, you know, nobody just writes their first novel and, you know, someone comes along and gives them a deal and says, okay, this will be in print everywhere. No, you have to go through this sort of roller coaster of writing it, getting it out there, and people saying, no, it doesn't work for this, that, or the other reason. A lot of what was happening was people were saying they couldn't relate to my stories and my characters. You know, I was getting a lot of that. And this is before We Need Diverse Books, you know. I signed with an agent, I think, in 2011. And I think all this started happening in 2014. But luckily for me, I did have success in India. So my first novel was published by Scholastic India because things were changing in India as well. And the kids were going and saying, Enid Blyton doesn't work anymore. We want to read about children or teenagers who look and sound like us, at least partially, at least there's some connection, right? So even though the book that the Scholastic published for me was set in Boston, it was still an Indian teenager who was trying to organize her older sister's wedding. And so, you know, Scholastic published it, and the best thing about this whole journey was this is the Indian cover for this book. It was called Red Turban White Horse when Scholastic India published it, and the pictures around it are pictures from my family and my sister-in-law's wedding, which was the inspiration for this book. So it says my sister's hurricane wedding, because yes, there was a hurricane in Massachusetts in 2011. It was Hurricane Irene, and it canceled my sister-in-law's wedding at the last moment, and we all running around crazily trying to figure out how to actually make things happen. And while it was happening, I'm like, oh my God, this is not happening. There's not a storm track to Wellesley. And this stuff is not going to get canceled. And the picture on the bottom left is my husband and my sister-in-law and my 2 kids who were growing up. And all of this, and the picture in the middle is, in the cover, is my dog, Yogi, who the cover illustrator actually, very kindly put on the cover. So this is, again, some of the inspiration for that story. So it was directly from my life. It was, it was amazing that I was able to, the characters are different, but the situation was the same. And of course, there was inspiration from Bollywood. So there's a lot of weddings in Bollywood movies. I don't know why, because, it's like rom-coms anywhere, right? So there was a lot of that in it as well. So I was happy to put all my inspirations, for pulling from my life, pulling from Bollywood, into that story. But the best part of that entire journey was going and talking to kids in schools in India. So this is some of the places I went. It's a school in Mumbai and Chennai and Delhi and Bangalore. And it was amazing. These kids were so excited. They made like a mandap. A mandap is like a tent made out of flowers that a wedding takes place under. In each of their schools, the kids put up this mandap for me to sit under and talk about the book. So it was amazing because I was letting them see themselves in a book, and they loved that. And I loved that for them. So I'm not sure what is happening. Oh, right. So these are letters I was getting from them. So like, this is a kid who read it first, who read my book Star Curse when she was 15, and then she read it 2 years later and she still loved it. So these are the sort of things I was getting, like some of them really love Star Curse, which has still not been published in the US, by the way. Just saying. But she actually took it to college with her when she graduated high school. And then they were doing things like, hello, I have read your book, RTWH. So, in Bollywood, a lot of the movies get abbreviated and people talk about them in that abbreviated name. So like Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge is DDLJ, and everybody knows what DDLJ is. So these kids were doing that to my book and saying Red Turban White Horse was, RTWH, and it was amazing. I loved that. So this really made it worthwhile, the entire journey. And so these are the books that I published. So Red Turban White Horse came out in India in 2013. Star Curse came out the same year. And then I had a middle grade novel. And Star Curse was a young adult historical, which was my first young adult book that I finished. And I got an agent for in the US, and it went out to publishers here. But everyone's like, well, a historical set in 12th century India, okay, Civil War we can deal with, World War II is fine, Revolutionary War is fine, but I don't know what this is. We don't know where to put it. So it never came out there, but it did quite well in India. And then in 2015, I had a middle grade fantasy for younger kids, and I loved writing that book. So then in 2019, I had a milestone, and that was having my first book published in the US. Because it was lovely to reach readers in India, but it was very hard for me to support these books because with the time difference, I couldn't travel there. I couldn't go and talk to librarians there or go to high schools or bookstores. It's very hard to support it when you're all the way on the other side of the planet and you're trying to call schools in the middle of the night and set up, video chats and things like that, but it didn't work very well. But in 2019, I had my first book published in the US, A Match Made in Mehndi, and it came out with Little Brown. And it also came out in paperback in 2020. So this was a huge milestone. Uh, it was a huge milestone, so I'm just emphasizing that. So it was huge for me and my family. And at that time, I was working at Wellesley Books, which is an amazing independent bookstore in Wellesley. And it was amazing to have a book launch with, my fellow booksellers and have a big party and have all the people that I learned writing alongside, all my critique partners and my friends from SCBWI and the Writers Loft and all the other people that had known my journey, uh, for them to be able to come and, celebrate with me. So this is a big moment. So then another big moment for me was last year when the first book that I'd ever published, Red Turban White Horse, came out in the US, also with Little Brown. And it looks a little different, and the cover is a little different. The title is completely different. It's now called Sister of the Bollywood Bride because they were like, no one is going to know what to make of Red Turban White Horse. Because if you're Indian, that is like a shout out to the bride's groom. He comes on a white horse, really. So we changed the look and feel of it, but it is the same book. And I'm so happy to be able to share this book, with audiences and readers here. So this is actually in Shrewsbury with a math club. And look at these kids. They're all super smart math whizzes. And I was able to share my book Starcust with them. And Starcust is about, like I said, it's set in 12th century India. It's about a girl who is amazing at maths. Her father is the biggest mathematician, the most famous mathematician of his age. His name is Bhaskaracharya. And he wrote the manual on mathematics that was used in India for centuries. Like if you learn math, you used his manual on maths. It was your textbook. And it was named Leelavati, which is the name of a girl. And half the maths problems in the book are addressed to the girl. Tell me, beautiful girl, if a flock of geese flies to this lake and 10% of them go here and 50% of them go there, how many, it's like word problems, but they're all addressed to a girl. And it's, thousands of years, it is hundreds of years old. So I wanted to write about this girl, Leela, whose father was an amazing mathematician, and, use that legend and share it with these kids. A lot of them are South Asian, and they got it. They got it. They knew about Bhaskaracharya, which you guys probably don't. And my kids only learned about Leelavati, the manual, and Bhaskaracharya because we went to the Museum of Science in Boston. And there's a display called Mathematica, which has got the history of maths. And there's one page from the Leelavati. And it just talks very, very dismissively about about the manual. And it says, Bhaskaracharya wrote this, and, he does this with decimals, and he does that with fractions. Doesn't say anything about the fact that it's named for a girl. It's Leelavati. Who was Leelavati? If it was called Amanda, people will be saying, who is Amanda? Hold up, who's Amanda? Tell me that first, and then talk to me about the decimals and the fractions, right? So my kids and I saw that. I'm like, I'm going to tell you who that is. And so I really love sharing that with them. And then this is in Lexington and Shrewsbury, and I don't have pictures from Ashland here, but I went to Ashland and Natick, which is my town. And these kids came out and they brought henna with them for match made in Mehndi, and we did Mehndi and we ate samosas and we talked about the book, and it was amazing. And I was really, really happy that these kids had mirror books. So these were the letters I was getting, some of them on Twitter. This very nice person called Suraj. Oh, wow, he's a doctor. I didn't see that. He said, I liked it because of this, and that, but at least a little bit because there's a character named Suraj and he was super likable. So I'm like, wow, it's great that, And then, this kid just went to a library, just found it at the bottom. And she's like, it feels embarrassing to read this about my own book, but, she found it there. And just because it was on display in a library, and she loved it. And I loved that she could do that. And yeah, so this is what makes the whole journey worthwhile. My kids are grown up now, and these books are no longer for them. It's for kids like them. So my daughter's actually graduating this Saturday from college. So I'm very proud. This is my youngest. So, I don't know what happened here. So what next? Right? What do I write next? Um I am still very, very, very inspired to write about, write what you know, right? So I know my little slice of the Indian and the Indian American experience. And I still feel like if you look at the world just through books, it looks like Europe is this much of the world and Asia is like this much of the world. That's what it feels like if you just look at books. Because, still, it is still the case that publishing is in its infancy in places like Asia and Africa and South America and other parts of the world that are not as wealthy and as prosperous as some of the Western nations. So it still looks like it's worthwhile trying to write and share that experience and leave it for people to read and see themselves in. So I still feel like there's a lot of story in these worlds that I can write about authentically, and I want to do that. So, what do I know? I know about the migrant experience. I have been a migrant twice over to Australia and to the US and assimilating, and I'm really interested, really, really interested in what happens with the next generation, like what kids decide is worth keeping and what they want to let go of and what they want to change and keep their version of. Because I feel like when migrants come to their adopted country, there's a lot of stuff that they bring in their head that is not in like a suitcase or on their resume. It's in their head, and what happens with the next generation. I really want to know what they do with it, and I write to find that out. And the other thing I would love to keep writing is books about joy and not trauma. Because when you see a lot of books about immigration, sometimes it's about not fitting in and, feeling awkward and, all the difficulties that come with being a migrant. But there's also joy. There's so much joy. There's so much amazing stuff. And kids are not thinking about it, especially, when you go generation plus one, they're not thinking about identity or anything like that. They're just thinking about what they want to be, who they have a crush on, all of that stuff. And that is the stuff I want to write about. And then I'm also really interested in writing about historicals. I love history, and it's like Hamilton. Every generation reinterprets the past, and you can go back and write about the past with what you know now. And it's so interesting to be able to do that. And even fantasy worlds, because I have this one particular point of view. So when I write about a possible future, or I write about a fantasy world, it's going to be different than somebody with a different set of experiences. So I'm interested in doing that, and I hope to be able to do that. And most of all, I really hope that my books can be both windows and mirrors for their readers. So a girl like me browsing in a library can feel seen and be seen. This is my family tree. So the picture on the left, the person sitting down in the middle is my mother. And these are 3 of her sisters. She had 4 sisters who all grew up in Meerut. And so her and her sisters, one of whom wanted to be a writer and wrote poetry in Hindi in Allahabad and had it published in magazines. So she was an inspiration for me. And then the picture on the top right is me with my 3 sisters. So, I grew up in a family with girls. And the bottom picture is me and my sisters. We have 4 girls. We also have 5 boys, but we have 4 girls. And my daughter is in the middle. And 2 of her cousins live in India. And one of her, she has boy cousins as well. But out of the girls, 2 of her cousins live in India and one of them lives in Australia, and they're all very close, and they have a lot of stories that I hope to be able to pull from and be inspired from. And this is me myself as probably 6 years old, and then as a teenager, and then now. And all of these ages, I can hear my voice as a 7-year-old. People find their voice, and for me, it's always been the younger me that I want to write about. I don't want to write about the adult me. I want to write for children because I feel like children just drink stuff in. And if you reach them at that age, it changes their worldview for the rest of their life. If, as a child, you're reading about places and people, they will not be strange to you or strangers to you for the rest of your life. When I came to Boston, I had already read about Boston. It was not new to me. I had read Little Women, I had read Love Story, I'd read so many other books. It was not strange to me. So I want people to be able to read about, those worlds and, find that voice in my head and keep dreaming on. That's it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has some, and then we can go to lunch. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yes, yes. So, that is very, very true for many people. For many people. For me, myself, it was not true at all. My father was a writer. He wrote for magazines, he wrote for newspapers. We came from a family that loved reading and writing for generations. So, a lot of it has to do with people wanting their kids to be successful. And, I was very privileged as a child growing up, and we didn't have those pressures. So it was do whatever. And my father was so proud when my books were published and my sister's books were published. And so we were very lucky to have supportive parents like that. So, yes, it is absolutely true. It is absolutely true. I have seen it around me all the time, but I was lucky to be one of the few that did not have that at all. Hi, Meena. So she is an author, and her books are very well published in India. And all of her books have been optioned into Bollywood movies. One of them was produced, The Zoya Factor, and did quite well. And then she's also written screenplays that have been turned into movies. So she's a screenwriter. Those little names that go by in the credits that I could never read or even get a handle on, like how to be them. My sister's one of them. So, yeah. But, luckily for me, my books are also getting options. So maybe Hollywood, right? So, yeah. Or Netflix or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. To even that you would support them and help them know that that is an option, because like we just heard, it is very, very common for immigrant families to push their children towards successful careers and all that. And the thing is, it is the people who are comfortable, who are prosperous, who get to tell the stories, because there's no money in publishing. There's none. If you're an editor, if you're a writer, of course you can be J.K. Rowling, but not everyone is. So it is the people who are comfortable and who can take that time and write a story on spec, like put all the effort into it, you know, who can be published. That is just the way it is. So, I would totally inspire them to tell their stories and to be able to write their stories, but also give them direction into how publishing can actually be a career. So there's craft and there is business. So I think with the little ones, craft is key, because being a good writer is a talent you can use in any field. If you're an engineer, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, it still helps you if you're a good writer. So I think parents will be very supportive of their children learning to be good writers, as long as they don't make it their entire career, which they can when they're older and they can make their own choices. So, the way to sell it is saying, improve your writing skills, learn how to write well. And they want their children to learn to write well. You need the support of the parents as well as the children. And if you're talking about adults who actually want to write, then they need to know the business side as well, and how to get an agent, and how to get in a critique group, and how to navigate that world of trying to get published. That self-publishing is a thing that is more and more viable now. So, for the adults, I would look at the business side. For the kids, I would look at the craft side. And, they are people like Mina who have run very amazing, successful, programs, and got the teenagers in their town that, come from these backgrounds interested and inspired and engaged. And I'm sure there's a playbook there somewhere in the librarian world that I know nothing about. That could be probably more helpful. And have authors come who look like them. Really, it helps. It helps a lot, because you can then you can't imagine yourself being someone that you have never seen someone like you be. That is a sentence that's probably grammatically completely incorrect, but if you understand what I'm saying, it's like it helps to see an author who looks like you. They have seen lots of doctors that look like that. So yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes, several. And it's offline, and we have our little groups like on Facebook, and we'll go to retreats together, or we'll just go get a cup of tea and samosas. you know just chat. But no, it's really, really helpful to have community, and it's nice to have community from people who get you. So it's lovely to have that, and I feel really lucky to have that in our area, because there are places in the country where you don't have a lot of support in your local area, but we have a lot. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. It is hard. It is hard. I have written while my kids were playing soccer. I have written while I'm sitting in the pickup loop waiting for them to come out of school. You know, um, it's hard. You get up early sometimes and just write, or you say, okay, you get the kids today, and I'm going, and, getting 3 hours at the library to finish this, chapter. You just have to make the time. And what really helps is having deadlines. So, I would make internal deadlines for myself. They never worked that well. They would just go by like this. But when I actually was publishing, then the deadlines were hard and you had to make time. So then when you have to send something to your editor that is due this weekend, you're going to write day and night to get it done. So it's helpful to have deadlines. But I had a good work ethic from my Fidelity Investments days. So I kind of pulled from that, and it's just a different type of deadline. It's a deadline. It's work. So it's like any type of work. You have to make the time. If you're any type of contracting position, you make the time on your own time. So yes, it is. And what is really hard in writing that is different than like programming is you need empty time. You need staring at a wall time. You need daydreaming time. And you can't do it when you're trying to manage 50 things. So you have to make that time, because you cannot do fiction without having time off to just stare into space and make stuff up, because you need that. You can't just pull it out of a hat It's not like doing math on a calculator or something. You have to make stuff up, and for that you need the staring into space time, staring at a wall time, and just sitting and having, silence. So you need that too. That's hard. Yes, yes, true. So true. Yeah. You need downtime. Need downtime. They're so overscheduled all the time. Yeah. Yes, yes, I have a few going. So I have a few going. So, and then I have a backlist that I'm trying to see if we can revise and revisit, like Rishi and the Comic Cat, which my agent loves, but it's 10 years old. It was written for a different audience, so I can try and work with that. And Starkers, which I love. I hope one day it makes it here. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh my God, yes. It was because I'm not a historian. I stopped being a mathematician 20 years ago. So it was a lot of research, and I was scared to uh, get things wrong. So I did a lot of research for that. And yeah, it was well reviewed in India. So I don't think I got a lot wrong. But what I did do was it's a full on love story, because the legend about Leela is that she was born under a bad, you know, constellation or something, and anyone she married would die. That is the legend about her. So her father, who was the best astronomer and mathematician of the time, set up these water clocks to predict the one small set of time where she could get married. It's auspicious, right? So he set all this up, everything was made ready, and then she was dressed as a bride, and she looked into the water clock, and a pearl fell and it blocked the hole, and the clock didn't sync at the right time, and the time passed. And that was her only time that she could have properly gotten married without any adverse, consequences, as per the astrologers of the time, right? So in my version, and so he felt so bad, he named all his maths books for her, and she became the best scholar and all of that stuff. That's the legend. So in my version, she does that on purpose. So, so yeah. So, but it's a full-on love story with a completely, not the suitable boy and all of that stuff. And yeah, so I had a lot of fun with it. So there was a lot of research, but there was also a lot of daydreaming. So yeah. Oh gosh, it's out of print in India because we're trying to sell it here. So I got all my rights back. So it would be difficult, but the Ashland Public Library has a copy. Yeah, it's in their collection. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, you have Rishi as well. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think reading has been up in the pandemic. I think YA is the one genre where book sales were up last year. I don't know if it'll last, but I think they were literally staring at screens the whole entire time. So maybe they had a little time to, go sit under a tree and read a book, without being plugged into something. So I just feel like there will be some version of storytelling needed for every generation. If the format changes, so what? You still need storytellers because you will have readers, you will have consumers of story. I mean, it's a human need. We were telling stories around campfires, in back in the day when they were cavemen. But so we need, as a species, stories. We need them. So there will always be some version of that. If it won't be books, it'll be something else, And I think teenagers are an audience that need stories more than anyone because everything is possible for them and they're searching for so many different things that it's nice for them to have just mountains of things available from previous generations from all over the world to draw from. And that's what libraries are, right? We are the guardians of all of this treasure. Yeah. Oh gosh. What am I reading? I'm reading a lot of stuff in Hindi lately. My daughter, believe it or not, took a 6 credit course in Hindi. She's graduating on Saturday. Like I said, she goes to Cornell, and they have a really amazing South Asian languages program. So she actually took Hindi as an adult and learned the script and everything, and we've been reading together. So yeah. So I've been reading Subhadra Kumari Chauhan and Premchand, Munshi Premchand, and all these books that are not available even in translation. So, but it's nice to read outside your genre because you can make stuff up, you know. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.